Hello, and welcome to Ideas Live. My name is Karen Anderson, and this is my co-host,
Anne-Marie Oomen.
And we have a really timely topic to discuss today. In fact, it's so timely that almost every day there's something in the news about the LGBTQ community in one way or another, nationally or internationally or even locally. So we kind of thought maybe this would be a good time to reintroduce that topic, which we already touched on, well, 4 years ago now. Mm-hmm. We had a lesbian couple, Jen and Oomen Cameron, in to talk about their relationship and to kind of educate me, I remember, about some of the issues that they deal with, especially since they moved from Chicago to Traverse City. What was that like for them and so forth. So now, 4 years later, some things have changed.
Yeah.
So we're bringing this topic back and getting a couple of expert opinions about it.
I think I'm fascinated by this, and I'm also thrilled because as a teacher, it has become more and more present in my life and among my students. And I'm, of course, as we're trying, I'm trying to understand that perspective and how that changes my relationship with my students, which, you know, we're all people, mm-hmm. but still for instance, the pronoun issues and also the idea of how we become more inclusive. Mm-hmm. I think that's on the radar now too.
Will that affect curriculum as well?
I would think so. I mean, reading selections both for people who are part of the mm-hmm. LGBTQ community and people who are not. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that would?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a change because even though I'm retired now, it's been something that's progressed since my college years. You know, when did you first become aware of that community?
Well, aware at different levels.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And I was mentioning to you before that I grew up with a mom who had a best friend, Pearl, who was a single woman who lived with another woman. And my mother had a crusade to find the right man for Pearl and would be fixing her up. And of course, Pearl wasn't all that interested. And but I don't think my mother ever quite got it or mm-hmm. accepted that mm-hmm. reality. But I think I sensed then that, you know, this might be okay for Pearl, Mom.
Yeah.
And so the awarenesses sort of emerge. It's not like instant.
Yeah.
And then, what about you?
College.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any, I mean, grew up on a farm, you know, it was so rural that there was really no sense of that. There were people in high school, particularly a couple of boys who were categorized as different. Mm-hmm. And I found myself, actually I liked them mm-hmm. as friends, mm-hmm. but I didn't understand, have full comprehension of what might have been going on because
or how they fit in.
Yeah,
or didn't fit in. Or.
Yeah. It was awkward, I think, for them to understand how to be who they were, and I didn't have any empathy with that at the time. It was definitely college, and the first literature that I read that mm-hmm. introduced me to that was Virginia Woolf's Orlando, mm-hmm. which just blew my mind, you know, and it was a kind of fantasy, but this mm-hmm. boy becomes this girl, and then this girl becomes this powerhouse of a person, and it was, I mean, that was just fun to read. Yeah. And then slowly mm-hmm. I began to understand, oh, this is not unusual.
This isn't a fantasy.
Right, this is happening. And
yes.
And then, of course, I learned about Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West. And mm-hmm. so, and then I think it began to grow from there as a teacher.
Right, and then within your own world and your own circle of friends and colleagues,
of course.
Begin to.
Yeah, what about for you?
What a journey. I mean, it must be agonizing in some ways.
Yes.
Agonizingly slow. That permission to become yourself is arriving. I mean, it's still arriving. It's not here yet.
Yeah.
But in some ways it has seemed to me that things have changed rather quickly in recent years.
Yes.
But when I made that ignorant comment, someone from the community said, it doesn't seem fast to us.
I'm sure.
And so,
I am
you know,
sure.
it's just another...
And we have so much still to learn. I mean, we have, I want to be educated and I want to continue to interact. I just think it's so important now in this particular troubled time when we have more and more blind actions of bigotry and hate, that we need to be conscious of who we are.
What are the issues?
Yeah.
Right.
And you're right about, it seems to me we need, you know, for those of us who didn't have a gender question in our past, that there's just a need to understand, you know, what is it all about?
And what is it like now? Well,
Yeah.
that leads us into
indeed
our substantive discussion with experts. Good thing
Right.
we have experts. So we'll bring our experts in and we'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to Ideas Live. Today we're having an in-depth conversation about the LGBTQ community, which is increasingly in the news and on our minds and in our hearts. And we need to know more than we do about the issues and personalities that represent that group. So we have two experts with us today who laugh at the idea of being experts, but to us they're experts because they know a good deal more than we do. Anne-Marie Oomen, I don't know if I reintroduced you.
I'm co-host.
And we have Taylor Comiskey, who is a member of the Traverse City Police Department and also their liaison with the LGBTQ community. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
And Ben Marentette, who is city clerk. We have two city employees with us this morning, by chance actually, but you are city clerk. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And both of you are also members of this community, so you have experience at many levels. You know, we were talking about how some of these issues are more and more in the news, and just, you know, a couple days ago there was an article in the Record Eagle about what is called now the Queer Prom, which is being organized evidently for the third year. I don't remember reading about it before here in Traverse City. And the enthusiasm that this group of students brings to this project is quite remarkable, and their openness. And I'm curious, do you know whether straight teens also attend, and what's it like?
So I actually attended the event. This is my third year attending.
Cool.
And so yes, it's open to not only just LGBTQ folks, but anyone with a disability who maybe wouldn't feel super comfortable. We had a couple blind students, some on the autism spectrum. So it's kind of just an all-inclusive dance where kids from not just Traverse City, but into those more rural areas where maybe they don't feel comfortable being a girl wearing a suit to prom or taking their boyfriend because they're not out at home. So it's a really cool event, lots of volunteers. There's no photography because it's a safe place for people. So if they're not out, they can be who they are. And yeah, truly a really awesome event to see.
How many would you say roughly?
About 100 this year.
Isn't that great?
Yeah,
That's
fantastic.
fantastic.
the historic Barnes Park was a wonderful host. They were super, super welcoming and accommodating, and it was a really, I think all the kids had a great time.
So this to me feels like a kind of progress that we should be proud of. And I think when Ben and I met and chatted informally, you grew up in this region, right?
I did. I grew up in Kingsley, so I always said Traverse City because that's where people knew where Traverse City is, but Kingsley.
Yeah, and so maybe you can just briefly say you've seen changes in this community, and from the beginning you've been here. How have things changed for the LGBTQ community just overall, do you think?
Well, I think first I have the privilege of sometimes going into the high schools and talking with the students there, and there's these alliances of folks from all sexual orientations, I would say. And there's just a lot of support. I remember being in one classroom just a couple of years ago, and there was the quintessential sort of jock football player who was, super excited for his fellow gay male student who wanted to go to homecoming and take his boyfriend. And there was just this sense of it felt like comfort. Like nobody really seemed threatened by the diversity in the room, the differing sexualities in the room, that everyone was just like, we're just here to learn and support each other and embrace one another for just all of their goodness. And when I went to high school, I graduated in 1998 in Kingsley, I certainly didn't feel like I could come out. I know that I had fellow classmates who are still friends who knew, but we didn't really talk about it.
So this is just 20 years ago.
Just 20 years ago.
Wow.
And so for me to see that, it's a beautiful thing. Now, I know that not every classroom is that welcoming, but the ones that I've seen lately, it's just been a major, major step forward. And I just think about how that just supports learning too. You don't want to feel when you're a teenager or a kid like, you've got this scar that makes you undesirable or less of a person. And if you do feel that way, it just distracts you from really allowing yourself to flourish. And so that's just really nice to see.
Yeah, because belonging is an important feature of growing up and being successful.
Absolutely.
So we're broadening the definition of belonging, maybe.
And I think it's interesting because I'm just going to say this out. When I was in high school, there was only the word either homo or gay or queer. Those were the three words, and there was no designation or anything. And now this all-embracing sort of acronym that's evolved,
right,
has allowed us to, just in that, I think, allowed us to think about gender as a more fluid thing, and not an either or.
Exactly. Right. It's not binary. It's not that cut and dry.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of folks don't quite understand. It's something that people are working to wrap their minds around. And it's wonderful because I feel like there's no longer this, I can't talk about the trans community. It's all right, I want to know. That's the sense that I'm getting from different folks. There's a long way to go, but we're here today and we're talking about it.
Yeah,
that's good.
Thank you.
In fact, I don't know if it'd be helpful just briefly to talk about some definitions. I mean, we hear terms now that certainly have not been part of the general discussion, like cisgender. Can you help us with cisgender or genderqueer or intersex?
Sure.
Or some of these that were...
So first and foremost, LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then usually queer or questioning. And that kind of encompasses a lot of folks. What was the other terminology?
Cisgender.
Cisgender means, so I'm going to presume, but Benjamin here is I am a cisgendered female, meaning I was born female on my birth marker and I present as a female. So that's how I identify. Some folks are born with female anatomy, but they internally feel as though they are male, so they would be transgender male.
And then intersex, I think, is where you have maybe genitalia that is not, it could be male and female chromosomes that are associated with male and female.
Okay.
And it's very
So that's a more biological base?
Yes.
Physiological base?
And it's interesting if you look back, there's actually a really interesting documentary on Netflix that it's a void in my mind at the moment, but doctors, when a newborn would present with both, they would generally just pick for the child. So they'd lop something off, or they'd tell the parents, this is what's going to happen, and you just need to dress them this way. And I think that goes to show you how much gender is a social construct. And the fact that a doctor could say, well, you were 50-50, so we just went with male, that as that person or that child grows, they could have a huge identity crisis, and it would be that physician's fault, because to me, it's, the child needs to have that right and that say-so.
Right.
So let the child develop, even, okay, their genitals don't look normal, but let that child grow into that person. It's their body. It's kind of like my whole spiel on like piercing a kid's ears. It's like they can't consent to that. So I feel medicine is starting to evolve, and that's where we see some issues, I think, in medicine too, especially the transgender community, and seeking hormone therapy, and doctors who are reaffirming of their.
Yeah. And we're going to have a whole program on that next month, on the transgender community. It's interesting because for a while there was a kind of way to categorize. You were lesbian or gay or this or this or this. And now the next level of awareness is sort of that it's a continuum. So maybe you're not right over
and
here.
It's not
you
a
might
continuum.
be,
You might not even be in one place forever. I mean, you can shift.
Well, and psychology has kind of always defined, and there's the Kinsey scale of masculinity and femininity, and even a hetero person, you fall somewhere on that scale. Not everybody is masculine, and feminine, and so then sexuality kind of plays into that as well.
I remember when I was in my 20s, living in Chicago with a roommate, and she said, everybody's really bisexual, but most of us never express it. and as soon as she said that, at first I kind of went, really? And then I thought, well, yeah, that's probably true. I mean, it felt at a gut level, that felt kind of accurate. It's simplistic now, but the sense was that this isn't as clear-cut as we have always pretended it was. So I just wish that they could condense all these initials under an umbrella term that would make it easier for us.
Queer, actually, is a really easy way to condense it.
Because that it represents
the queer community.
And isn't that the history of that word is so interesting, because it was derogatory and it's been reclaimed as a kind of honor,
Well, John Young, through Polestar, I remember having a conversation with him about it, and he's like, I still have issues hearing that, because that was used as a derogatory term towards him growing up. So.
And I don't think it's universally embraced for that reason. So it's wonderful. People are wanting to understand, and so I'll get the question: is it okay to say queer? And to me, it is. It's a term that I think more probably younger folks tend to use, in particular because they also didn't have the negative history with it. But it really is an all-encompassing term, and there's many in the LGBT community that are comfortable with using the word queer, but there are some that aren't. And so I think that's while that's not a clear-cut, okay, great to use it, but it at least helps understand.
In fact, I meant to lead off this conversation with you guys by saying, as Anne Marie mentioned, we're still learning. We're still learning, and we grew up at a time when there was nothing available for us. And so I sort of want to say, if I say offensive and ignorant and really
if I say something stupid,
things,
which I probably already have.
I probably have too.
Feel free to
we're
correct
too,
me.
We are learning.
You kind of can't have a dialogue if you're not sitting at the table. So
So I'm aware of my ignorance, and I trust that you will help me reduce it a little bit.
I'm aware of your inquiry and your interest. And desire to really understand.
For sure. Speaking of understanding, I want Taylor to talk a little bit about how it is that the Traverse City Police Department, which is, we're not a major metropolitan area, and yet somehow they've made a somewhat enlightened decision to have a liaison officer with this community, and how that came about, and what are some of the goals that you have for that position?
I think a huge credit goes to my boss, Chief O'Brien. He's a very forward-thinking man, kind of has taken this idea of community policing by the horns and really hasn't looked back. He works closely with the city, I'm sure, as you know.
And
he encourages so in police work, it's very kind of hierarchical, like your chain of command. So he encourages the captains to encourage the sergeants to encourage me, the road patrol officer, to kind of be your own. He uses the word mini chief. So see an idea, see a community, see a neighborhood, and because this town's not that big, and there's times that we have 2-3 officers working. So you really get to know your area of town, and if not the whole town. So you see a problem, you see a group, and you say, hey, like, I think we should do a community barbecue here, and it would help deter bike thefts because, whatever. And a lot more proactive policing. I mean, the nature of my job is inherently reactive. You have a problem, you call 911. Most people don't call 911 to tell me their day is going well. So we deal with a lot of negativity and a lot of trauma. And so anyway, I got off of training, and my sergeant at the time, Sergeant Richmond, who's now sergeant of the Detective Bureau, but he encouraged me to, I lobbed up this LGBT liaison idea. I actually saw Corporal Danny Woods from Detroit Police Department. That's all she does. She is there, she works in the office of the chief, but Detroit is a much bigger community with higher demand. So this is just another hat that I wear. So my first and foremost job, I work noon to midnight as a street cop. I'm also on our fatal crash team, and then now I'm doing this. And Sergeant Richmond really encouraged me and supported me, and I ran the idea up the chain. They liked it. It got presented to the city. The city liked it. And then it went public. And it was funny because when it went public, the comments, on Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, were, are you kidding me? Like, what a waste of money, which I was already here. Or people saying, like, snowflake things, or so when you call 911, okay, send me a black officer, send me a gay officer, and that's just not the case. And I can take that. I have pretty tough skin. I kind of have to in this job. So I look at the positives, and it's simple things like, I ran into a gentleman within the first couple months of me doing this, and I had done like a coffee with a cop thing, and people could come and talk, and it's not just the community. I mean, it's parents, it's coaches, it's anybody, teachers. And this man came up to me and goes, I've been divorced for 5 years, my son is 13, and he came out as gay, and I have no idea how to navigate this. And he said, when that came out, that made me feel like there's somebody I could go to be like, how do I do this? And that just like warmed
That's something
my
a lot
heart.
of people would never think about, is part of the beauty of having a position like that. And then the flip side, and I feel a very important side, is the interdepartmental training. So I'm the chief, shoulders the responsibility on me of training our officers to know proper terminology, to you arrest a transgendered man, how are you going to search that person? You find they have appendages or something, are you going to make them take that off? Are you going to make a woman in drag, or a man in drag, take off their wig? How would you write a police report if their name is still John Doe on their license, but they say I'm Jane and I'm a woman? A lot of pitfalls potentially, and we teach them how to navigate that. And so that way, if something does ever happen, which it hasn't, and the department's kind of taken it with pretty open minds, they can't claim ignorance or I didn't know or my social circle never touched this. It's no, you're trained in how to set that standard, and that's what I think we do at the city police. Is we set a bar of community, and I think it's received pretty well.
Is it? That was my next question. Is how have your colleagues?
Great. I have them. They ask me questions all the time. Like, hey, can I say this? Or I have this, and I don't know how to handle it. Or I've even had some people email me like, hey, I had a domestic assault last night between 2 men, and I gave them your contact info if they need anything. And it grows in your repertoire of a police officer. We have all these gadgets and tools and fast cars, but the best tool we have is our ability to speak. And I think that they most see it as another tool, so that they can be open to a community that historically there is a lot of prejudice between the police and the queer community. So
another piece of your role that I also found interesting was that you do some work in the schools with students.
So we have school resource officers, so they strictly do the schools. And it's important to kind of delineate those
Sure.
responsibilities. However, I have been involved in some TCAPS trainings where sex ed is something that, as a queer youth, you're not really exposed to. You know, it's all very catered towards heterosexual people. So that was something I was a part of recently. Things like the prom we just had, they have youth groups. At Polestar, the community center, I've spoken a couple times on panels and discussions. And so, and then I also give help to our school resources officers. And if they, like in particular, there was the suicides at Kingsley recently, and it came onto the forefront that one may have been LGBTQ and perhaps a factor. I then reached out to, or a parent reached out to me. I reached out to, I believe it was, Deputy, I'm blanking, could be Wallace. He is the CPO for Kingsley Schools, and we had a dialogue, and he said, this is what I hear, and I don't think it's a factor, but how can I do better? And so I think people are willing to be open.
Isn't that the question, though? How can I do better? You know, that's really powerful.
And I think the image of police today is one of challenge. And if you accidentally start off on the wrong foot and it was just because of a word you said, and you just ruined that interaction with that person, even if it's a traffic stop, you know, for us it's nothing, it's another traffic stop, but for that person, that's a police contact. And if it's not positive, that could blur into their whole image of policing in general, which, and I think you have to recognize the intersectionality of race and the LGBTQ community. And I find that, you know, racial tensions with law enforcement and people of color is historically rough and still have issues. You know, one cop does one thing and it's easy to be kind of lumped into that bad egg group. And I just take it upon myself, and I think every member of our department does, to have positive interactions and kind of right that ship, because oftentimes, especially in this area, it could be a perceived issue instead of an actual issue. And that doesn't mean it's not valid. It just means you need to shed some light on it. So.
And even Traverse City evidently has a reputation for being a welcoming community for the LGBT.
Is that the case? Do you think that's the case?
He could probably speak more on that.
I think so. I think that there is a significant LGBTQ population in Traverse City, and I think it's partially because it sort of has built itself in the sense that, oh, this is a community that I can move to because I've got, folks that can relate, that are from the same community, and so it's just built up naturally because it has that reputation, and I think that people from the LGBTQ community that move here feel comfortable for the most part. It's not always comfortable. You know, I can honestly say I've had negative slurs shouted at me as recently as just a few years ago. So I don't want to paint like everything's roses.
Right.
But I think that it's a lot better than most places in terms of an openness.
And in terms of actual legislation or ordinances, or do we have the protections we need?
My job is protected as a city employee. That's in our charter or policy.
What about non-discrimination and those kinds of?
I mean, state law doesn't protect you from denial of housing, from your job.
It does not.
Does not.
No, it does
Is there
not.
any movement afoot to change that?
I think that, well, first I'll say the city has an ordinance that also prohibits discrimination, housing, and employment. But the penalties are pretty
lax.
They're lax. They're not really a deterrent. I would say that it's
enforcing it. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And the business has the right also to just say, I don't want you here because of X, Y, or Z. And I've personally experienced that, not here, but I've made a reservation with my wife, and we were asked not to go. And I just said, okay. They didn't say why, but you can usually feel that out.
Right.
So,
Yes.
and that's legal.
I think that is there movement being made? You know, I think just today in the Associated Press, Michigan's Attorney General, she is really pursuing avenues to make it so that people will not discriminate against LGBTQ individuals for adopting children.
Okay.
But that's really using the powers of her office. It's not because there's a state law. It's more, where does the state direct funding for adoption agencies? And it's, that's when I say using avenues. It's using tools and levers like that to try to right things.
What about in your experience? Taylor was explaining how you have worked to educate your colleagues. Has a parallel thing happened for you in?
It has. I think I remember when I was 21 pulling into the governmental center parking lot with my boyfriend at the time, and I was like, all right, you got to duck.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want anybody to see you. And that's a terrible thing. I remember having colleagues come over, and I would take all the pictures of us down from
This is my friend.
apartment.
Gosh.
Yeah, this is my buddy. And and I remember just a couple years later, I think because I worked with a lot of people who are more like my parents' age, so they had children that were my age.
Yeah.
They were always trying to set me up with their daughter, which was like a real compliment. But I think eventually I started to figure out, wait, he's not biting on any of this. And then we started to have some conversations. I came out to my parents when I was 20, and then decided, a couple years later to come out at work. And everyone, for the most part, has been really supportive.
Including your parents? Were they pretty?
No,
Oh.
they weren't. And actually, they were more supportive when I was with a guy that just seemed like a macho buddy, and it was more like who they, just me bringing home another one of my guy friends. And then when I had what my husband now and I call our non-wedding wedding, because at the time you couldn't get married in Michigan, and we sent out, invitations, and it was clear that Matt and I just absolutely love each other. We're in love. And that made my parents very uncomfortable. And my dad passed away a few years ago. My mom is, she likes Matt, but, I get a lot of, she sends me a lot of stuff that she's obviously still not quite settled on the issue. But I will say at work, I don't have a lot of people reach out to me like Taylor has and ask well, what do you say, what do you do in this sort of a situation? And so that doesn't happen so much, but a lot of people ask me about Matt, and that's just really nice, and it's nice that there's people are excited, they're happy for you.
It normalizes the relationship.
It does, and it's nice. Every human wants people to appreciate who they are, and so I'm no different, and I absolutely value my marriage. I love my husband with all of my heart, and it's nice when other people, share in that joy. It just feels really good.
Yeah. Thank you.
When Elon and Jen Cameron were in 4 years ago, they had come from Chicago and talked about how in Chicago they felt comfortable holding hands, walking down the street, but when they got to Traverse City, not so much. Now, do you think that's changing, or is?
I think it's an individual comfort level thing. For me as a woman, and then as a police officer, I'm pretty hypervigilant. So I don't hold her hand in public very often, more because I don't need people knowing she's my wife, and if they don't like me because of my job choice, she could be a target. And that's just kind of how I think. Kind of paranoid, but
you're in that business in a way.
Yeah,
you're more aware of.
Cautious.
Yeah, but I think that there's, when friends say hey, where should I go? There's definitely certain businesses that we point out and we're like, hey, go here. It's super friendly, or because there are certain ones where I'd be like, maybe don't go to that bar, or go to this bar, avoid this part of town. It still exists for sure.
I, to answer your question, because I'm not in the same role that Taylor is in, I feel, there's times where I feel comfortable. Matt and I have given each other a kiss or held each other for a minute, in Home Depot, but you just, you never know. And we were recently on a flight from California to Michigan, and our seat assignments got messed up, so we weren't able to sit next to each other. And he was more forward on the plane, so he gives me a quick, peck on the cheek. And I actually said to somebody at work that this might be hard for you to relate to, but for a second I just felt like, is everybody okay with that? And I wish that I didn't think that.
Yeah, you have to.
But it was just for, I mean, I was so glad he did, and I wouldn't change that. And but I just, you know, and there were people that like looked up, and it's like, you know, you get some winks, and then, you know, you don't know what everybody else is thinking. But it does occur to me. Whereas, you know, I think for a heterosexual person, unless they're really against public displays of affection, they wouldn't think twice about it.
Right. I was just
right.
thinking it's unfortunate that that has to even enter your mind.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
What are we doing on time? Are we?
We're okay.
Toward a wrap up.
About 3 more minutes.
Okay. This has been so helpful and so meaningful. Are there some things that we haven't covered that you wish the general public knew, or that, you know, you want to, we haven't?
Yeah, things that you would really, a message that you'd really like to say to people who maybe are just beginning to grapple with this subject.
For example, what if an organization, any nonprofit or social organization, would like to have someone come and talk to them on this issue and educate their group? How would they find? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am always open to speaking. I get asked to speak quite often, and I'm in the works of developing a training in which other departments could bring me in, and I could train their department members.
That is cool.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess the main points I would say is, you know, especially to those who maybe are kids or coming into this community, is, you know, don't think that the people you're around right now are your forever tribe. As you get older, you pick who you want as your support system, and just if you're in a little rural podunk town in Michigan, there's so much more support for you out there you just don't know about yet. So keep going. Suicide is something that particularly impacts this community, as well as homelessness. Youth come out and their parents kick them out. And then they don't feel super welcome at a church basement where most shelters are, so where do they go? That's something that I think is a very important dialogue. And then just kind of the last plug I'll give is also as a police officer. Don't think that because you're a part of this community, you know, me as a gay female, I never thought I would fit the mold of a police officer. But I do, and it shows that you are the police are the community are the police.
And you're changing the mold.
I'm trying to, and I would encourage anyone who has a negative perception of police to have a dialogue with somebody, and I often try and do that. If I'm met with hatred or met with an insult, it's very easy to quit back and say, well, you know.
Yeah.
But instead of that, say, okay, why do you feel that way? Did something happen? And I think this is wonderful that you're facilitating a dialogue in which myself and Ben can come and speak about not only our experiences, but what we hope for because we're both very invested in this community, and I hope to be here many years helping to create a safe place.
Yeah. Ben, anything you want to add to that
I
as
just
we wrap up?
really appreciate, like Taylor said, that we're having a conversation. And I would just encourage anybody to just have the conversation. And for kids or people who are at a certain stage of their life where maybe they're not feeling fully supported, I always just say, don't let anybody set your limits for yourself. You go as high as you possibly can, and as Taylor said, your tribe today is not necessarily your forever tribe.
That's a great reminder.
I've always sought out people who appreciate who I am in totality, and that's what I want for everybody.
Great. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing your experience and your expertise, and the message of caring and support is just so valuable. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, and welcome back to our wrap-up discussion on the LGBTQ community conversation which we just had, which I found enormously helpful.
Officer Taylor Comiskey and Ben Marentette, who's a TC City Clerk.
Right.
Knowledgeable, warm-hearted, and so open to our questions about being educated.
And how lucky are we that we have two people in city government, I mean within the public sphere, who are so open to
And
growth
articulate.
and they're caring. And they make, I guess what I'm trying to say is they made it feel okay for me to ask my questions,
That's right.
to stumble, to not know what I'm talking about, but
Right.
to keep asking.
And we're very tolerant of that whole thing that happens when you're in a new area of where you have to, you're always groping for your language.
No, and you don't want to offend somebody.
Right.
Can I use the word queer? Or,
Right.
What's the right thing?
And we learned
here?
a lot about language today, which I'm so grateful for. I think that that's a key entree into this whole thing. Is it, what is the term? How do I ask about this? It's not just what are my questions. It's like, how do I ask the question?
And Taylor pointed out to me when I first met her, and again today, that the issue isn't just, I mean, we focus on the people who are members of the LGBTQ community, but you know what? An equal amount of work needs to be done by the rest of us
Yes.
to educate ourselves. And that a good deal of her work is educating her colleagues about some of these issues. And I thought, oh, that's right. She isn't just reaching out to that community, she's reaching in. And I think we all, have that.
We have that opportunity. I think those of us who are becoming more familiar have that opportunity to also be the sort of mini ambassadors. You know?
Exactly.
You know,
And, almost like speaking up against bullying. I mean, if you hear people saying ignorant or insensitive things, to have the courage to speak up about that.
Yeah, yeah. And I haven't always.
I haven't either.
But they both inspire me to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they do it in a caring and non-judgmental way.
Right.
This has been so
It has been
helpful
really,
for me.
really helpful to both of us.
All right. Thank
And we
you for
hope
joining us.
to you too. Thank you.